Hello and welcome to the Scented Chronicles, Part 2, unearthing the rich history of perfume. Today we're diving right into the 20th century. In 1905, Coty introduced perfume to the masses and created the first commercial chypre fragrance for mass production called L'Origine de Coty. Chypre by Coty was released in 1917. So this is another perfume, 2 fragrances there. And if you are a perfume collector like I am, you might be lucky enough to find some of these fragrances. Some might have a little bit of the juice left, some not. But let's have a look at this word chypre. It's spelt C-H-Y-P-R-E and it's French for Cyprus. And there's a history about that I will go into in another episode. But if you want to learn, it's a classification of fragrance basically that contains ambery notes and oak moss and musk. Perfumers actually state it's impossible to make a good chypre fragrance without the presence of musk. And if you want to know how to say it, just imagine the word sheep and then put an accent on it. Chypre, chypre. I remember when I was studying in Graz and our lecturer for the first couple of days kept saying chypre. And one of the students from Bulgaria, she said, "What is this chypre? Who is this sheep? Where is the sheep?" She thought she was talking about sheep. Anyway, it's quite funny. Anyway, but staying in the 20th century, let's have a look at 1921. Do you know what iconic #1 bestseller fragrance of all time was launched in 1921? I'll give you a clue. It's got a number in it, between 1 and 10. Chanel No. 5. Now, a mistake made history when the perfumer Ernest Beau's apprentice misread his formula and added 10 times more aldehydes to a sample blend of Chanel No. 5. And Gabrielle Coco Chanel loved it so much that they kept the formula and it became the most iconic fragrance of all time. So I always tell my students, don't be worried about making mistakes when you're making fragrance because you just might come up with an iconic masterpiece such as Chanel No. 5. But this legendary mistake is a popular tale and one told many times over. However, Ernest Beau's family and colleagues at the time refuted the story, saying there is no proof that it ever happened and that Ernest himself never even mentioned it to them. But regardless of that, I think it still makes for an entertaining story. It was released on the 5th day of the 5th month in 1921. And 5 was Coco's favourite number. In fact, she used to launch her fashion range on the 5th day of the 5th month every year. And it was always lucky for her. So she thought that this perfume, sample number 5, might be lucky for her. Wow, well, she really struck gold. But it wasn't luck, but the overuse of aldehydes that defined its success. She basically said to the perfumer, I want a fragrance that smells like the scent of a woman. Forget all these overpowering florals. I want something clean. And it wasn't the first perfume, because what you call Chanel No. 5 is a floral, but you call it an aldehydic floral because of the presence of aldehydes in there, which are perfumery ingredients. And I will have episodes that will cover perfume materials. And it wasn't Chanel No. 5, contrary to many reports that it was the first fragrance that used aldehydes. It wasn't. But it was the first fragrance to overuse these aldehydes, which led many to believe that it was the result of an accident, because what kind of a perfumer would overuse aldehydes to that quantity? So it could only have been a mistake. And I think that's probably where the story actually came from. But I think it is a very nice story. And it was this overuse of aldehydes that defined its success and changed the perfume industry forever. In fact, the French government once reported that a bottle of Chanel No. 5 sells every 30 seconds. But even though it's up there, one of the best-selling perfumes of all time, not everybody likes it. In fact, recently, Fragrantica, the website, had a list of the 10 most hated fragrances worldwide, and Chanel No. 5 was on that list. So it just goes to show that even though it's iconic and it's loved the world over, it's not for everybody. You can't please all of the people all of the time, as I tell my students, so don't try to please people, all of the time, all of the people. But let's skip now to the 1930s. Now, in this wonderful book, if you're a fan of perfume books as I am, there's a book called Perfume Legends, French Feminine Fragrances by Michael Edwards. And in this book, he discusses several perfumes and their impact throughout time. It's an incredible coffee table book. It's fascinating, rich with stories about these iconic fragrances. But he notes that the 1930s were marked by the Wall Street crash of 1929, which weakened businesses around the world. Even more so luxury ones. But Jean Patou, who was a designer at the time, even he wasn't spared. But to save his house, he opened a shop in New York and launched a fragrance called Joy in 1930 with the tagline, Joy, the costliest perfume in the world. He says a few drops of joy to his clients. That's what he said is, I just want to offer in this Great Depression a few drops of joy to my clients, and its prohibited price at the time is the equivalent to this day of €1,000 for a 30ml bottle. But it made it a legend and the gamble paid off. Joy is probably the most natural perfume on the market, mostly from jasmine flowers, and also among the most expensive to produce. So said Jean Callio, Patou's in-house perfumer since 1967. Only limited quantities of Joy can be made because it's made from very expensive flower essences from grass, which can be produced only once a year. And that has preserved the mystery and desirability of the perfume. Michael Edwards, in his book, also recounts that Je Reviens by Worth was launched in 1932 and at the heart of a fable which began in 1924. I love this fable. And I quote, "My grandfather used to tell the family that it was the most beautiful story he knew," says Frederick Worth. "Each perfume was part of the love story. Dans la nuit vers le jour, sans adieu, je reviens vers toi," as he would say in English, "In the night, just before dawn, because I can't bear to say goodbye, I'm coming back to you." I've got goosebumps as I say that. It's a beautiful fable. And for this beautiful fable, Worth collaborated with Lalique for the first 3 perfumes in the fable. And they collaborated with them in the conception of the bottle. Therefore, the content of the bottle becomes the equal of the container and not just a means to get a refill. The perfume becomes an object of beauty, therefore, not only to the nose, but to the eye. And if you're a perfume bottle connoisseur or collector, then you'll know that Lalique perfume bottles are highly desirable and highly collectible. I have a few in my collection, one of which was L'air de Trompe by Nina Ricci, and I got it for a snip at €1 from a vide grenier, which is a flea market in France. And I got it from a lady who had no idea what it was, and I felt really bad afterwards, but not too bad that I wanted to give her more than €1 for this bottle, which she was asking. And I later found out it was worth about €150 because it's a Lalique L'air de Trompe and it is empty. Even though it's empty, it's worth around €150. So if you go to flea markets, keep your eyes out and take your magnifying glass with you as well, because you'll need it to look underneath the bottles to find out if it really is a Lalique. But I just need to say that quote one more time in the fable, and I'll say it in English. "In the night, just before dawn, because I can't bear to say goodbye, I'm coming back to you." Let's skip to the 1940s now. When writing about the 1940s, Michael Edwards, in his book, singles out a couple of more notable perfumes. He tells how one morning in 1946, a small plane flew over Paris. As it passed above the Place de Trocadero, it dropped thousands of tiny green and white parachutes. Imagine this. Each of these parachutes carrying a little perfume bottle, and people were absolutely stunned. It caused the biggest traffic jam, recalls André Pierre Tarbes, who is the first advertising manager for Parfum Carven. "My Griffe had landed. The name, my signature, came instinctively to Madame Carvin that of one of her signature dresses. She had a signature dress that was a simple green and white striped cotton, and it also was inspired by her favourite flowers, gardenia, jasmine and rose. Parfum Carvin gave a perfume promotions a new edge. Besides dropping perfumed parachutes, it was the first house to give away thousands of samples, 1/6 of an ounce and larger, these perfume samples. Now, Guerlain used to give small samples in their shops, but Carvin was the first to be so generous, says André Pierre, sorry, sometimes I do butcher the French language, so forgive me. But imagine that, being in Paris, near the River Seine, and thousands of tiny green and white parachutes are dropping beautiful perfume bottles in these boxes that also have the green and white stripes. But a couple of years later, in 1948, L'Air de Trompe was launched, created by perfumer Francis Fabron. It was one of the first perfumes that came out of the house of Ritchie after Nina's son Robert realised that to survive the aftermaths of the war, it was necessary to diversify. It was born from his vision. My aim is to dress reality in the colour of dreams. When I was 18, I came across the proverb of my life, let reasons speak, but listen to the heart, Robert Ritchie once said. Translated into perfume, his dream still touches millions of women. At the time, women had never seen anything as extravagant as a bottle topped by 2 doves, a conception born from the minds of Nina herself and Marc Lalique. It's one of the 5 most sold bottles in the world to this day. It has been revisited throughout the decades by different artists, creating limited editions like Andy Warhol, David Hamilton, and more recently, Olivia Putman. The bottle itself requires for each piece approximately 15 finishing operations done by hand by crystal craftsmen. And it is an incredible bottle. It's iconic. Sometimes you might have the 1 dove, sometimes the 2 doves on the top. And I've yet to get my hands on the limited edition Andy Warhol one. So if you have one in your collection, sling it my way. In 1947, Christian Dior launched Miss Dior. And the perfumers behind this scent were Paul Vacher and Jean Carles. And talking of Jean Carles, I'm actually privileged to be an acquaintance of his great-grandson, 4th generation perfumer, and I'm currently working with him on a re-edition of my fragrance Drama Queen, so stay tuned if it's not already out there right now. But let's have a look at another thing by Dior. Diorissimo. The 1940s gave way to the 1950s, marked by Christian Dior. He writes in his autobiography, Dior by Dior. In the spring of 1954, I put forward the Lily of the Valley line, inspired by my lucky flower, a line which was at once young, graceful, and simple. And this is a quote by Christian Dior. Now, Lily of the Valley, if you ever find a fragrance that states it has Lily of the Valley in, there's no way it will have the actual essence of it, also otherwise known as Muguet or Muguet. Lily of the Valley, if you've ever seen the Lily of the Valley flowers, they're so tiny little, like little tiny white little snowdrop type flowers. They're beautiful, but you just can't extract the essence from them. They used to do it, and it was a laborious task, and they used to do it by hand. But all Lily of the Valley fragrances these days are synthetic. But Diorissimo, created by perfumer Edmund Rudnitzer, was launched in 1956. And its creator wanted to launch a resolutely floral fragrance. He wanted to recreate the smell of Lily of the Valley, as it was Christian Dior's favourite flower, but also the designer's lucky charm and the emblem of his fashion house. Did you know that? I know so many fascinating facts in my stories that I'm regaling actually from my book, Fragrance is My Favourite F Word, available now on Amazon worldwide, if you haven't already got your copy. A lot of the stories that I regale in my podcast are from my book. And once again, this fragrance was named after the couturier, like many of the house's other creations, like Miss Dior. But Diorissimo contains the spirit of Christian Dior, the fragrant breath of his soul, the slogan proclaims. This fragrance stands in contrast to the other perfumers of the time, which were suaver and heavier. It was also the last fragrance launched before Christian Dior's death in 1957. Diorissimo was an immediate success and quickly became one of Dior's legendary fragrances. Its lightness and freshness appealed to the women of the time, who were also looking for something new. But it inaugurated a new architecture of perfume. It inaugurated a new architecture of perfume, as the perfumer once said. It was no idle boast that Diorissimo marked a fundamental change in the philosophy of perfumery. You see, the perfumer, Rudnitska, started to react against the harsh synthetics and, as he called it, perfume confectionery, a common practice following the advent of synthetic materials. He felt unable to continue and returned to the south of France, where in a house high in the hills above Grasse, he started his own studio. And once again, inspired by nature, Rudnitska felt that the structure of perfumes had to be simplified, pared back to the essential core. He explains, not only were we pushing perfumes in the direction of food, but we were also putting too many ingredients into them. It made them too complicated and muddled. Perfume was becoming a little like the millefleur. The millefleur is what perfumers call the containers into which all of the perfume trials get thrown. And he quotes, "When we put too many ingredients into a formula, it tends to turn it into a millefleur." That thought hit me. From that moment, I told myself I must work simply. And I clung to the motto, simplify, simplify, simplify. And this is a motto I tell my students, work simply, especially when you are working with natural ingredients. Natural ingredients are so complex in their own right that you don't want to turn that fragrance into a millefleur. But let's now look at the 1960s. Duty-free shops increased travel. So what did that do? Well, that made perfume more affordable and gave birth to 3 legends that changed the industry. But duty-free shops and increased travel didn't just make them more affordable, they made perfumes more accessible, and of course, they made more sales. So Michael Edwards talks about one fragrance in the 60s called Calèche by Hermès. Calèche came at a time when no other fashion house had managed to duplicate Chanel. Even Louis Vuitton had failed. But Hermès proved that it could be possible again, and released in 1961, Calèche is the fragrance that brought the Hermès house to the heart of perfumery. It's also the first feminine fragrance presented by Hermès. Floral, woody and chypre. Calèche echoed the names of the brand's carriages. Composed of noble and sought-after raw materials, Calèche is both natural and sophisticated. Calèche is one of the biggest successes of the Hermès brand, a success signed by Guy Robert. The launch of the perfume received media attention, including a presentation on an ocean liner moored in Bordeaux, not far from me. In the shop at 24 Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honor, a serious cocktail party took place on May the 18th, 1961, and on this occasion the windows were decorated in honour of the perfume with sphinxes whose wings were drawn up to the ceilings. But let's look now to another fragrance. In 1953, Marcel Rochas decided to devote himself solely to perfumery, and on the death of her husband in 1955, Hélène took up the torch of the perfume company and moved it to Rue François in the former private mansion of Marcel Rochas. She was then the first female CEO in France, and at the age of 28, also the youngest CEO in the whole of France. Madame Rochas, the perfume, emerged in 1960. And she said, "I gave Madame Rochas my image, feminine and soft, because I wanted to offer something of myself. My perfume was to perpetuate Rochas's elegance, whilst reflecting the spirit of the independent woman I had become, the woman who was once the muse of Marcel Rochas. becomes a symbol of a company dominated by a woman who will modernize the brand and open it up internationally. And here again, the success is signed by the perfumer Guy Robert, or Guy Robert, of course, as the French would say. Let's have a look at another fragrance now, Fiji by Guy Laroche. This fragrance pioneered a new generation of fresh perfumes. It was also the first French perfume to use American-style marketing techniques, using the slogan, "A woman is an island, Fiji is her perfume." And the visual of this advertisement depicts a naked woman squatting on the sand of a beach, which doesn't sound too romantic, but squatting on the sand of a beach, cradling a large Fiji bottle. But also there's been less daring versions with a dressed woman that have also been made in the advertisements. And how was the name Fiji chosen? Well, it was chosen by a gentleman called Jean Menet, who was the president at that time of Lancôme, and he spun a globe. You know those globes that you might sometimes have in your office or your lounge? I got one that opens up to reveal a bottle of champagne. But he basically spanned the globe in search of a short and catchy name. And that was it. The fragrance was composed by Josephine Catapano, and the object, she said, was to design a floral fragrance in the wake of L'air de Temps by Nina Ricci, but more modern. The strength of Fiji is to marry opposites. It's fresh, sunny, soft and racy, while exhaling a stunning elegance, anchored in the exotic and the distant. It was launched in 1966, but it took 7 years and the 70s for the perfume to meet with success. But 20 years later, it had sold over 80 million bottles. So patience, my fellow perfumers, patience when you're making and launching a fragrance, even if it's not an overnight success, might have the potential 20 years later to sell over 80 million bottles. Let's skip to the 70s, an era when I was born. Marketing expressed women's liberation and independence, and this is demonstrated in Revlon's cheeky advertising for the scent Charlie. Gender roles were reversed and the strengths changed too, from stronger parfum to eau de cologne and eau de toilette. The bottles were becoming more convenient for adults on the go. They were smaller and easier to carry around, and larger bottles were now reserved for the dressing table. And if you have a Google of Charlie perfume Revlon advertisements in the 70s, there's one that I'm looking at right now where there's a couple, perhaps colleagues. It shows the back of them, and they are walking down the street, and the female is patting the male on the bottom. Apologies if you can sometimes in my podcasts hear military aircraft in the background. I live about 20 miles from a military airbase, and of course they have to do their practicing somewhere. But let's skip now to the 1980s. This was the age of room rocker perfumes like Opium, Samsara and Poison. These overwhelming fragrances were banned in some American restaurants because of their powerful aroma. Yes, really they were. Restaurant owners feared that their intensity would spoil the enjoyment of fellow diners, and I have to concur. The 80s was an era of big hair, shoulder pads, and women's power expressed in the boardroom and beyond. Perfume was one way to express their strength and unconventionality. Think of Working Girl with Melanie Griffith and Sigourney Weaver. Great movie, really does represent the 80s and the emergence of women's power in the boardroom. But it was also an age which saw the launch of the celebrity perfumer. And who am I talking about? Elizabeth Taylor, of course. Journalist Sally Hughes talks about Elizabeth Taylor in the article Elizabeth Taylor, the Original Celebrity Perfumer, which appeared in The Guardian online. And the article discusses the wealth Taylor made from her line of scents, her dedication to the perfume line, and the reason, even in her later years, she continued to outsell other fragrances by celebrities at the peak of their power. And as quoted by Sally Hughes, the obituaries of Elizabeth Taylor may have praised her acting and charity work, but it seems they left out one thing. The most beautiful woman in the world was also the world's biggest selling celebrity perfumer. The actor left an estimated $600 million to $1 billion fortune, largely the yield of her scent empire. In 1987, Elizabeth Taylor invented the celebrity perfume franchise with her first fragrance called Passion, and released her last, Violet Eyes, in 2010. But while today such merchandise is often the result of a pop star turning up to a photo shoot and pointing at a bottle, Taylor's had a genuine flair. A shrewd businesswoman, she teamed up with the respected Elizabeth Arden Company and supervised the entire collection of 11 perfumes, even when her health was failing. Unusually, she also always wore her own creation, the top-selling white diamonds, but never took her side job for granted. The actor Richard Harris was allegedly kicked out of her mansion, Elizabeth Taylor's mansion, for drinking the perfume. Ew. But she never took her side job for granted because Perfumery gave her a fatter paycheck than Hollywood ever did. Again, quoted by Sally Hughes, she goes on to say, "But how could an actor who seldom worked in the last decades and whose beauty had long since been lost to illness and obesity continue to shift more perfume than Britney and J-Lo at the peak of their powers? It's simple. Taylor represented the true glamour at a time when stars are divided between the po-faced elite and the down-market oversharers. Nobody wants to smell of soy lattes, yoga mats, and macrobiotic baby food, much less beef curries, Prozac and tears." That's hilarious. Taylor instead offered a heady world where men were alpha and women were unapologetically, lethally feminine. We're almost done on our final part of the Scented Chronicles, but we can't leave without talking about the 90s. This was a time of cleaner, fresher, crisper fragrances like Issey Miyake, L'Eau d'Issey, and Calvin Klein's iconic fragrance, CK1. These fragrances heralded a return to unisex fragrances. Launched in the early 90s, CK1 changed the fragrance game entirely. It kick-started a genderless trend and shifted the craze from heavy oriental perfumes to lighter, simpler, cleaner scents. But if we look now, the 21st century, the new millennium paved the way for the rise of niche or cult perfumers. Frederic Malle was born into the world of perfume as the grandson of the founder of Parfum Christian Dior. Frederic Malle launched a range of perfumes that revealed the names of the perfume masters or noses of the industry, lifting the veil of secrecy that once shrouded them. This was an opportunity for them to create the fragrances they'd always dreamed of. They had complete creative freedom and no financial restrictions regarding the ingredients. And these fragrances are lauded as haute couture fragrances. And it's so true because even the greatest perfumers today are constrained by regulations, by budgets, whether it's the budget of the house they work for or it's the budget of the client, and indeed ingredients. But imagine being a perfumer, and a perfumer is an artist. And imagine being an artist and being constrained by such things. It seems almost unthinkable. Imagine if someone constrained, I don't know, Banksy or Andy Warhol and told them they couldn't use this colour or they couldn't use this canvas or this material. But perfumers are constrained by such things unless they're independent perfumers like myself and many friends of mine and many of my students. So imagine being now a master perfumer, always being bound by these restrictions, and now a man like Frederic Malle says, what fragrance have you, not for a client, not creating this for anybody else in the world, it's the fragrance that you have always wanted to create, using the ingredients that you've always wanted to use. Now go ahead, I'm taking off that leash, go forth and create. At a dinner party hosted in his honour, Frederic Malle was quoted as saying, "With fragrance, you do what you do in life. People do what they want. What do you do with boyfriends? You keep them for 2 months and then you sort of dump them. And then you go on to another one for 2 months. There are some incredibly faithful people that will keep the same fragrance all their lives, and you can recognise them by that. Fragrances are very much matching with each person's physiology. And so people's attitude with fragrance is very much linked to their inner self. There's a link between how you wear fragrance and how you deal with things in your life. But what's next? What's next in the realm of fragrance? These days, budgets are usually reserved for the marketing machine, and development is controlled by business executives, not artists. Natural ingredients are restricted or banned, and favour is given to synthetic byproducts of petroleum, and every other new mainstream of perfume seems to be a rearrangement of another. Has the real art of perfumery been lost along the road, leading to profit margins? Maybe, but there is hope. With the rise of the indie and self-taught perfumers and boutique brands, this is an exciting time for the industry. Entrepreneurs who are in control of their own perfume production are in control of their budgets and therefore free to use expensive natural materials and retain complete creative freedom. In the words of Roger Dove, the industry is dominated by a few soulless corporate giants who churn out vast numbers of new fragrances every year. Some last for a while, the majority do not, whilst at the same time discontinuing or changing some of their classical greats on the premise of profit, giving rise to individuals whose fragrant memories have been forever stolen. But a small renaissance has begun, as not everyone wants to smell cheap. Consumers are waking up to the idea of individuality once more. The cognizant is turning its back on mass-marketed fragrances. There is a revival in creative perfumery, shifting the craft back to the geniuses of the master perfumers. The art of perfumery is once again in the hands of the gifted. As the saying goes, without marketing, you have creativity. Without creativity, you have nothing. So on a lighter note, I hope that you enjoyed that the episode of the Scented Chronicles, and join me next time, Melanie Jane, here at the Scentcast for another exciting episode. Who knows what I'm going to be discussing next, but it will be riveting, I assure you. Take care, stay fabulous, a bientôt.